A giant ship begged for help. A human mechanic removes parasites and turns it into the ultimate war machine. Its hull, once shining and proud, was now dull and streaked with rust. The waves lapped lazily against its sides, and every creak and groan of its frame sounded almost like a cry for help. Sailors and dockworkers standing on the pier exchanged worried glances. This ship, known simply as the Giant, had been in service for decades. It had sailed through storms, carried countless cargoes, and survived years of neglect. But now it was clear that the ship was struggling. It was more than just old age. It seemed almost alive in its suffering, as if it understood its own frailty. On the pier, a man walked toward the ship, carrying a toolbox worn smooth by years of work. He was tall and wiry, with hands that looked like they had molded and repaired more metal than most people could ever imagine. His name was Elias, and he had a reputation for fixing things others considered impossible. When word spread that the Giant needed help, it was Elias whom the naval authorities called. Others had tried and failed. The ship's engines were failing, systems malfunctioning, and there were reports of strange noises deep in its belly. Some called them groans, others whispered that the ship was moaning like a living creature. Elias studied the Giant silently for a long moment, taking in the streaks of rust, the bulging panels, and the damp patches along the deck. He could almost sense the history of the vessel, the storms it had endured, the ports it had visited, and the years of labor it had witnessed. He placed his hand on the hull and felt the vibrations of engines struggling to turn over. "You're tired," he said softly, almost as if speaking to a person. The sailors, watching him closely, were unsure if he was serious. Elias never wasted words unnecessarily, but his respect for the machines he worked on was almost uncanny. The authorities began to speak, their voices clipped with impatience. "Elias, we need results. The ship is failing and our schedules can't wait. We've had engineers in here for months and none of them could get the systems working again. Can you fix it or not?" Elias didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked along the deck, examining hatches, control panels, and access points. He listened to the creaks of the timbers, the uneven hum of the engines, and the clatter of loose bolts. Every sound told him something. He had a way of understanding machines that was almost like intuition. Finally, he looked back at the officers. "I can," he said simply, "but it will take time and I'll need full access to every part of this ship. Nothing hidden, nothing skipped." The officers exchanged uneasy looks. Time was tight and costs were already high, but Elias' confidence was hard to ignore. He had a history of bringing old vessels back to life, and the Giant deserved a chance. They nodded, agreeing to let him work. Elias set to work immediately. His first task was inspection. He went deep into the engine room, a place where only the most experienced engineers dared to venture. The air was thick with the smell of oil, rust, and salt. Pipes twisted like veins through the walls, and machinery that had once been the pride of naval engineering now looked tired and worn. He moved carefully, making notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. There were multiple problems, some obvious and some hidden. Rust had eaten through sections of the hull, barnacles clung stubbornly to the underside, and old wiring threatened to fail at any moment. The parasites of the ship were everywhere, feeding on neglect and weakness. As Elias worked, he began to dismantle some of the most damaged parts. Each bolt he loosened, and each panel he removed revealed another layer of problems. In some places, metal had thinned almost to the point of breaking. In others, electrical circuits were corroded, wires fraying like dead vines. It was painstaking work, requiring both strength and precision. He didn't rush. He believed that rushing would only lead to mistakes. Every step, every decision was deliberate. Days passed, and the crew grew used to seeing him move through the ship like a shadow. He worked from dawn to dusk, often skipping meals, completely absorbed in his task. Sailors would peek in, curious about what he was doing, and he would sometimes explain in simple terms. "These are the parts that make the ship breathe," he said one day, tapping on a series of pipes. "If these fail, the ship can't move. If we let the rust win, this Giant will fall apart like an old toy." At night, Elias would sit on the deck and look out over the water. The Giant creaked and groaned in the wind, and he could feel a strange bond forming. This was not just a machine to him. It had character, history, and spirit. He could almost hear the echoes of past journeys in its timbers, the laughter of sailors long gone, and the tension of storms survived. He felt a responsibility to honor that history, to bring it back to life not just for duty, but for respect. Soon, he discovered the worst of the parasites. In the engine room, hidden beneath layers of grime, were multiple sections of damaged wiring that could have caused catastrophic failures. Rust had eaten through support beams, and the hull showed signs of weakening in critical areas. Each discovery was met with a grim determination. Elias worked methodically, removing the damaged sections and replacing them with stronger, reinforced materials. He cleaned and polished, welded and soldered until every system was reliable and strong. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. A pipe burst, flooding part of the engine room with water and oil. A critical bolt sheared, forcing him to improvise a solution. Machines that had been silent for years refused to start, and alarms would ring randomly, signaling hidden problems. But Elias never lost patience. He treated each failure as a challenge, not a defeat. With careful observation, skillful hands, and a deep understanding of how the ship functioned, he began to conquer one problem after another. The sailors started to notice changes. The engines, once groaning and stuttering, began to hum steadily. The hull, reinforced and cleaned, no longer shuddered at every wave. Even the creaks and moans seemed to soften, as if the ship was responding to the care it was receiving. Some of the crew whispered among themselves, saying the giant was coming back to life. They watched Elias with awe, seeing how he treated every panel, every pipe, and every wire with the same care a doctor would give a patient. By the end of the first month, the giant was no longer just a failing vessel. It was showing signs of recovery. Elias had removed most of the parasites, both the rust and corrosion that threatened its structure and the worn-out machinery that limited its performance. But he knew the hardest work was still ahead. The ship was ready for more than repair. It was ready for transformation. Elias looked over the deck one evening, the sun setting in a brilliant orange haze over the water. He ran his hand along the railing, feeling the smoothness of newly polished metal. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly, "but we're just getting started." He knew the giant had more potential than anyone realized. Beneath the old, weathered exterior, the ship had strength and speed, intelligence in its systems, and the power to become something greater. The officers watched from the pier as Elias moved through the ship, often shaking their heads in disbelief. They had never seen anyone care for a vessel this way, not just repairing it but understanding it, listening to it. For Elias, this was more than a job. It was a calling, a chance to bring life back to something thought lost forever. By the time the first part of the work was complete, the giant was no longer moaning in distress. Its engines could start reliably, and basic navigation systems were functional. But it was not yet the ultimate vessel Elias envisioned. The ship had survived decades of storms, neglect, and mechanical failures, and now, thanks to him, it was awake again, ready for the next stage of transformation. As night fell, Elias stood on the deck, looking out at the calm water. He knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt the quiet pride of accomplishment. The giant had called for help, and he had answered. In return, it had begun to trust him, showing signs of life, strength, and potential. The story of its revival had just begun, and the world would soon see what could happen when human skill met an extraordinary challenge. The morning air was sharp with the scent of salt and oil as Elias descended once again into the belly of the giant. The ship had rested uneasily overnight, but now it seemed to pulse with potential, ready to reveal its secrets. The mechanic knew that repairing the visible damage was only the beginning. The real challenges lay hidden, buried beneath years of neglect, rust, and failed maintenance. These were the parasites, silent, destructive, and stubborn. Removing them would require more than skill. It would require patience, intelligence, and an almost intuitive understanding of how the ship lived and breathed. He began in the engine room, which felt more like a cave than a workspace. Pipes twisted overhead like vines, thick with rust, and the hum of machinery echoed off the metal walls. Elias crouched beside the main engine, examining the wiring and pipes carefully. Some wires were frayed, their copper cores exposed, while others had been poorly patched with tape that had long since disintegrated. Rust had eaten away at brackets and bolts, leaving gaps that threatened structural integrity. Every time he touched a part, he could feel its weakness and its history. It was as if the ship itself was speaking, whispering warnings through vibration and sound. Hours passed as Elias traced each wire, tightened each bolt, and cleaned the corroded surfaces. He discovered one section of the engine that had been ignored for decades, its valves seized and coated in a thick layer of grime. He worked slowly, soaking the parts in oil, scrubbing, and carefully freeing the valves so they could move smoothly. The process was painstaking, requiring both finesse and strength. If one valve failed again, the entire engine could stall, and a chain reaction of problems might follow. Yet Elias remained calm. He had faced similar challenges before, and he trusted his experience. While he worked, sailors moved cautiously around him, offering quiet assistance but mostly observing. They had begun to understand that Elias did not rush, and every action he took was deliberate. "It's like he talks to the ship," one sailor whispered to another, eyes wide with admiration. "I've never seen anyone treat a machine like that." Elias didn't hear them, but he appreciated their respect. For him, machines were more than metal and bolts. They were companions, challenges, and living histories all in one. As the day progressed, Elias uncovered the worst of the parasites. Hidden behind panels and beneath layers of grime, he found entire sections of the wiring system that were brittle and unsafe. He discovered rust that had eaten completely through metal supports in critical areas, weakening the ship's frame. He even found old sea growth, barnacles and other crustaceans, that had clung stubbornly to the hull beneath the waterline, threatening to slow the ship and disrupt its stability. Each discovery made the task feel larger, but Elias approached it methodically, never panicking, never complaining. One challenge required all his ingenuity. A section of the hull had warped over the years, creating pressure points that strained the engine mounts. The metal was brittle, and the previous attempts at repair had been poorly done, leaving gaps and cracks. Elias spent hours devising a temporary brace that would hold the structure steady while he replaced the damaged sections with stronger, reinforced metal. It was a delicate operation, demanding precision and creativity. One wrong move could cause the entire area to collapse, but he succeeded, his hands steady, mind focused, heart calm. Lunch was often a forgotten event. Elias worked through the hours, stopping only to sip water or wipe sweat from his brow. He moved like a shadow through the ship, never idle, never distracted. The sailors began to trust his process. Even the officers on the pier, initially skeptical, began to recognize his skill. Some would peek through open hatches, astonished at how Elias transformed broken parts into functioning systems. It was more than repair, it was revival. Elias also discovered something unexpected. The ship's old navigation system had been partially destroyed by a lightning strike years ago. Many had believed it impossible to repair, but he saw the potential. Carefully, he traced the damaged circuits, replacing burned-out components and reinforcing the connections. He studied old schematics, sometimes sitting cross-legged on the deck with light from a hanging lamp, connecting wires with patience that seemed endless. Slowly, the system came back to life. It wasn't perfect yet, but the giant would soon have the ability to navigate with precision once again. Even as he worked on the mechanical and electrical systems, Elias noticed other problems that were more subtle. The ship's water pumps were clogged and rusted, threatening to flood lower decks if left unchecked. The ventilation systems were partially blocked, making air circulation difficult and dangerous. He cleaned and repaired each system, carefully testing them, ensuring they worked in harmony. Every small victory was a sign of progress, a reassurance that the giant was responding to his care. But the work was not without surprises. A hidden storage compartment revealed decades-old damage, including warped metal and loose support beams. Elias discovered that some of the damage had been caused by previous repairs done poorly or rushed during emergency missions. The ship had been patched and patched again, leaving weaknesses hidden beneath layers of metal and paint. It was as if the parasites had been feeding for years, slowly wearing away the vessel from the inside. Elias approached each new problem with determination. He removed the old, decayed material and replaced it with strong, modern equivalents. He reinforced weak spots, ensuring that future stress would be handled safely. He worked late into the night, lit only by lamps that cast long shadows across the hull. Outside, the waves lapped against the giant, and the wind carried the cries of seagulls, but inside it was a world of focus and care. The sailors grew more involved as time went on. Some were assigned to assist, fetching tools, holding parts, or providing advice. Others simply watched, learning the importance of careful observation and methodical work. They began to see the giant not as an old, failing ship, but as something that could thrive again. Elias never took credit, but his quiet determination inspired those around him. The ship seemed to respond to his energy, almost as if it recognized the respect and care he gave it. As the weeks went on, more of the parasites were removed. Rusted sections were replaced, corroded wiring was restored, and damaged pipes were repaired. Elias even began improving some of the systems, reinforcing critical areas to withstand future stress. He worked methodically, checking and double-checking every detail. The giant's engines no longer groaned, they hummed steadily. Its hull, polished and reinforced, resisted the waves instead of creaking under pressure. And the navigation and electrical systems, once nearly dead, were starting to function reliably. Elias also began documenting his work in detail. He created schematics, labeled each repair, and kept careful notes of every system he touched. It wasn't just for the ship. It was for anyone who might follow in his footsteps, ensuring that future caretakers could maintain what he had restored. The giant was becoming more than just a repaired ship. It was a legacy, a testament to human skill and persistence. But even with all the progress, Elias knew the hardest work was still ahead. The parasites that had caused decades of neglect were gone, but now the ship would need transformation. It would need upgrades, improvements, and modernization to reach its full potential. The process would test not only his technical skills, but his creativity and vision. Elias welcomed the challenge. He had spent his life reviving broken machines, and the giant, with all its history and personality, was his greatest project yet. At night, he often stood on the deck, gazing at the moon reflecting on the water. The ship creaked softly, almost like a sigh of relief. It was alive again, ready to face new challenges, and Elias felt a quiet pride. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a caretaker, a guardian, and a silent partner in the ship's revival. The sailors, officers, and workers all recognized the transformation, though none fully understood the depth of his work. They saw results, but Elias understood the soul of the ship, and it responded to him in kind. By the end of Part 2, the giant was no longer groaning in distress or struggling against its own decay. The parasites had been removed, the hidden damage repaired, and the ship had regained its strength and stability. But the story was far from over. The giant was ready for more than survival. It was ready for transformation into a modern, powerful vessel capable of much more than it had ever been. Elias' work was only beginning, and the promise of what was to come filled the air with anticipation. The ship no longer begged for help. It had found a partner in Elias, someone who could hear its silent calls, understand its weaknesses, and bring out its hidden strength. The mechanic knew that the next stage, turning it into a formidable, state-of-the-art war machine, would require vision, skill, and determination beyond anything he had done before. But he was ready. The giant, restored from decay and neglect, was alive and waiting for its rebirth. The giant was no longer a ship in distress. Its engines hummed smoothly, the hull gleamed with reinforced metal, and its systems were steady and reliable. Yet Elias knew the journey was far from over. Repairing the old damage had been only the first step. Now came the most challenging part, transforming the ship into something greater, something capable of facing modern challenges with strength, speed, and precision. To Elias, this was not just engineering, it was artistry, strategy, and vision combined. He began with the engines, the heart of the vessel. The old engines had been reliable once, but they were designed for a time long past, unable to deliver the speed and endurance required for modern operations. Elias carefully removed components that were outdated or worn, and replaced them with reinforced parts that could handle higher pressure and temperature. Each adjustment was calculated. He tested tolerances, measured vibrations, and ensured that every connection could endure continuous stress. The process was exhausting but exhilarating. Each small improvement brought the giant closer to its full potential. Next, Elias turned to navigation and communication systems. The old systems had been restored in Part 2, but they were still basic. To transform the giant into a modern vessel, it needed precision instruments capable of long-distance navigation, advanced radar, and reliable communication in all conditions. Elias studied blueprints and selected instruments that were compatible with the ship's original design. He installed them carefully, wiring each system into the ship's power supply, testing their responsiveness and calibrating their functions. He moved from deck to bridge, checking every gauge, screen, and console, ensuring that the crew could rely on the instruments in any situation. The ship's structural reinforcements were next. Though Elias had removed rust and repaired damage, he saw opportunities to strengthen the hull even further. He added reinforced plates in critical areas, focusing on sections that would bear the most stress during high-speed maneuvers or rough seas. He also improved the ballast and weight distribution, ensuring the ship could move smoothly without compromising stability. Each adjustment required careful calculation. Too much reinforcement could slow the ship, and too little could leave it vulnerable. Elias worked meticulously, testing each modification before moving on. Then came the upgrades that would make the Giant more than just a strong and stable ship. He enhanced its defensive systems, ensuring that it could protect itself from external threats. He installed reinforced bulkheads, emergency pumps, and safety measures to handle fires, flooding, or system failures. He added automated systems to monitor pressure, temperature, and engine performance. Each system was designed to work in harmony, creating a vessel that was not only powerful but also resilient. The crew watched in awe as Elias worked. They had seen him repair the ship, but now they were witnessing the transformation. Panels that had once been corroded and useless now housed advanced instruments. Pipes that had once leaked were now polished and reinforced. The ship's engines could generate power efficiently and reliably. The sailors realized that the Giant was evolving before their eyes, becoming something far beyond what they had imagined. Elias also focused on the deck and operational systems. He replaced old rigging, reinforced the anchors, and ensured that all machinery used for navigation and deployment was modernized and functional. He carefully tested each component, making small adjustments as necessary. Even the lifeboats, winches, and cranes were checked and reinforced, ensuring that every aspect of the ship could operate efficiently. As the weeks passed, the Giant began to take on a new character. Where it had once been worn, groaning, and vulnerable, it now looked formidable and confident. Its polished metal reflected the sunlight, its engines hummed with controlled power, and its systems responded instantly to commands. Elias had worked tirelessly, combining the ship's original strengths with modern enhancements, creating a vessel capable of speed, endurance, and precise operation. But the transformation was more than technical. Elias also trained the crew to understand the ship's new systems. They learned how to operate the engines at optimal performance, how to interpret data from the navigation and radar systems, and how to respond to emergencies using the upgraded safety measures. Under Elias' guidance, the crew became not only operators but partners in the ship's transformation. They could feel the Giant's power and potential, and their confidence grew with each passing day. During testing, the Giant faced its first challenges. High-speed maneuvers put stress on the engines and hull. The reinforced plates absorbed impacts from waves, while the upgraded navigation allowed precise course corrections. Elias observed from the deck, taking notes and making adjustments in real time. Each successful test brought a sense of accomplishment. The ship was learning to perform like a new vessel, stronger, faster, and smarter than ever before. One of the most challenging upgrades involved the ship's long-range systems. Elias installed advanced communication arrays and radar systems that could detect distant objects, weather patterns, and other vessels. Integrating these systems with the ship's engines, navigation, and control consoles was complicated, requiring hours of wiring, calibration, and testing. Yet, Elias was determined. Each successful integration added to the ship's capability, bringing it closer to the ultimate form he envisioned. Elias also focused on efficiency. Modern engines and systems required careful management of fuel, power, and mechanical stress. He installed monitoring systems that could detect inefficiencies, allowing the crew to adjust operations and maintain peak performance. The ship's performance gradually improved with each test. It could reach higher speeds without strain, respond faster to course corrections, and operate reliably for extended periods. The Giant's transformation did not go unnoticed. Naval officers who had been skeptical now observed in admiration. They watched as the ship executed maneuvers that were impossible for older vessels, demonstrating precise navigation, speed, and stability. Crew members reported smoother operation, faster response times, and confidence in the ship's reliability. Elias' work had not only revived the giant but elevated it to a level beyond its original design. Despite the progress, Elias remained focused. He carefully reviewed every system, double-checking modifications, and ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. He knew that true transformation required thoroughness and attention to detail. He spent long nights on deck, observing the ship under starlight, listening to the hum of the engines, and feeling the stability beneath his feet. The giant no longer moaned in distress. It now moved with confidence, as if aware of the strength it had gained. The crew began to notice changes in themselves as well. They had once doubted the ship's potential, but now they were proud of its capabilities. They took greater care in maintaining their stations, learned to work with the ship's enhanced systems, and developed a bond with the vessel that went beyond duty. The giant had become a living partner, responsive and reliable, and they felt a sense of pride in operating such a vessel. By the end of the transformation, the giant had become more than a ship. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, perseverance, and care. Its engines could push it to speeds unimaginable for its age. Its hull could withstand stress and pressure, and its systems were precise, reliable, and intelligent. The crew could rely on it in every operation, confident in its strength and performance. Elias looked at the ship one evening, the sun setting behind the horizon and reflecting off the polished hull. He could see the giant in a new light, not as a machine to repair, but as a powerful vessel reborn. Its transformation was complete, and the ship now stood ready to face any challenge with confidence and strength. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his skills and dedication had made a difference. The ship had been given new life, and in return, it had exceeded his expectations. The final stage involved real-world trials. The giant was taken out to sea, where it faced simulated challenges designed to test its full capabilities. The upgraded engines handled high-speed maneuvers effortlessly. The reinforced hull absorbed waves without strain, and the advanced systems provided accurate navigation and communication. Crew members executed complex drills, testing the coordination between ship, systems, and personnel. Every challenge was met with success. Elias observed quietly, making small adjustments and providing guidance when necessary. He knew that a machine's true potential was only realized when it was put to the test, and the giant did not disappoint. It moved with power and precision, responding instantly to commands and demonstrating the effectiveness of the upgrades. Officers, crew, and onlookers were amazed. The ship had truly become a modern, capable vessel, far beyond what anyone had expected. At the end of the trials, the giant returned to port, its engines humming steadily and its hull gleaming in the sunlight. Crew members and officers alike celebrated the achievement, acknowledging Elias' skill, vision, and dedication. The ship had been transformed from a failing vessel into a capable and powerful partner, ready to face any challenge. Elias stood on the deck, looking out at the calm sea. The giant was no longer just a ship. It was a testament to what careful planning, skill, and perseverance could achieve. The crew had learned, the officers had been impressed, and the ship itself seemed to exude confidence and strength. Elias knew that this was only the beginning, but he also knew that the giant was ready for whatever lay ahead. The morning sun glimmered off the calm sea as the giant prepared for its first real mission after the long months of repair and transformation. Its hull shone in the light, polished and reinforced, and the engines hummed steadily, ready to respond to any command. Crew members moved about the deck with purpose and confidence, their routines now precise and synchronized with the upgraded systems. They had trained tirelessly under Elias' guidance, learning every detail of the ship's new operations. Now, everything would be put to the test in real-world conditions. Elias walked slowly along the deck, inspecting systems one final time. His hands rested on the railings, and he paused to listen to the steady hum of the engines and the subtle vibrations of the hull. The giant had become more than a vessel. It had become a partner, a living machine that responded to care, attention, and respect. He could feel the power beneath his feet, the reliability in every system, and the readiness in the crew's movements. It was a proud moment, but Elias remained focused. He knew that no matter how much preparation was done, the sea always had surprises in store. The mission itself was designed to test the giant's full capabilities. The crew would navigate through rough waters, perform complex maneuvers, and respond to simulated emergencies. Every element of the ship, from engines and navigation to communication and safety systems, would be challenged. The officers on board watched carefully, their eyes following the instruments, observing the crew and noting how the ship performed. The anticipation was electric. Everyone knew that this trial was the true proof of Ilias' work. The first test involved high-speed navigation through a narrow channel marked by buoys and obstacles. The giant responded smoothly, engines roaring quietly as the ship weaved between markers with precision. Crew members monitored radar and instruments, executing maneuvers in perfect coordination. Ilias observed from the bridge, making small notes and adjustments, but there was no panic or hesitation. The ship moved like a single entity, responding to commands as if it understood them instinctively. The officers nodded in approval. What had once been an old, struggling vessel now moved with confidence and grace. Next came a test of endurance and power. The giant was sent into open waters, where waves and currents pushed against the hull. Previously, such conditions would have caused groans, creaks, and potential damage. Now the ship absorbed the forces with stability, reinforced plates distributing stress evenly, and engines maintaining steady speed. The crew adjusted sails, managed ballast, and operated pumps as trained, all while the ship moved with remarkable efficiency. The challenge proved that the upgrades and repairs had worked. The giant was not only operational, but capable of enduring conditions far beyond its original limits. Communication and coordination were critical components of the mission. Ilias had installed advanced systems that allowed the crew to maintain contact with the command center, monitor nearby vessels, and track environmental changes. During simulated emergencies, these systems were tested rigorously. Crew members responded quickly, using the instruments to assess situations, relay instructions, and adjust operations. The exercises were intense, but every challenge was met with precision. The ship's upgraded systems and the crew's training had turned potential chaos into smooth execution. At one point, the giant encountered a strong storm front during the simulation. Waves crashed over the deck, and wind threatened to push the vessel off course. Previously, such conditions would have strained the hull and tested the crew's patience and skill to the limit. Now, the reinforced hull and upgraded engines allowed the ship to maintain stability, while automated systems and crew coordination kept operations running smoothly. Ilias watched from the bridge, silently approving the seamless performance. The ship moved confidently, cutting through the storm with strength and reliability. Even in calmer waters, the mission included complex maneuvers to test navigation and control. The giant executed sharp turns, quick acceleration, and precise positioning exercises. Every system, from rudder to radar, worked in harmony, demonstrating the success of Ilias' careful planning and upgrades. Crew members communicated seamlessly, responding to commands instantly and coordinating with one another to ensure maximum efficiency. The officers were impressed, acknowledging that the ship had been transformed into a reliable, capable, and powerful vessel. Throughout the mission, the bond between the crew and the ship became evident. Where once the sailors had doubted its capabilities, now they trusted it instinctively. They could anticipate how the ship would respond to commands, relying on its stability, power, and precision. Ilias had not only repaired and upgraded the giant, he had restored the crew's confidence and strengthened the partnership between humans and machine. The ship seemed alive with energy, moving with purpose and intent, a reflection of the care and expertise poured into it. As the day progressed, the simulation escalated to include emergency scenarios. The crew was tasked with responding to flooding in lower decks, engine stress warnings, and communication failures. Each challenge was designed to test their problem-solving skills, the reliability of the upgraded systems, and the coordination between different sections of the ship. Ilias observed closely, providing guidance when needed, but allowing the crew to manage most situations independently. The exercises were successful, the ship's systems responded accurately, and the crew handled each situation calmly and effectively. By mid-afternoon, the giant had completed all aspects of the mission. It had navigated rough waters, executed complex maneuvers, managed emergencies, and demonstrated endurance, precision, and reliability. Officers and onlookers were astonished. What had once been a struggling, failing vessel was now a fully capable modern ship, able to handle any challenge with confidence. The transformation was complete, and Elias' vision had become reality. The crew gathered on the deck, exhausted but proud. They had worked together with the ship, responding to challenges, executing maneuvers, and learning to trust the vessel fully. The giant had become more than metal and machinery. It had become a partner, a source of pride, and a symbol of human ingenuity and perseverance. Elias joined them quietly, observing their satisfaction and the ship's steady hum. He had done his part, but the success belonged to everyone: the ship, the crew, and the effort invested over weeks of hard work. Officers approached Elias, shaking his hand and acknowledging his contribution. "This ship is incredible," one said. "We never imagined it could perform at this level. You've not only repaired it, you've transformed it." Elias nodded, quiet but proud. For him, recognition was secondary to the work itself. The true reward was seeing the ship respond to care, skill, and attention, fulfilling its potential. As evening fell, the giant returned to port. The water reflected the golden light of the sunset, and the ship's polished hull shimmered in response. Crew members moved with satisfaction, officers recorded reports of performance, and Elias finally allowed himself a moment to relax. He walked along the deck, running his hands along the railings and feeling the steady vibration of the engines beneath his feet. The giant was no longer begging for help. It had been reborn. Elias reflected on the journey. The ship had arrived in distress, filled with hidden damage, rust, and decay. Through careful repair, attention to detail, and innovative upgrades, he had removed the parasites that threatened its life, restored its systems, and transformed it into a reliable, powerful vessel. He had trained the crew to understand and operate the ship fully, ensuring that the giant could perform at its best in any situation. The mission had proven the success of their efforts, demonstrating strength, endurance, and precision. Even after the mission, the giant continued to demonstrate its new capabilities. Crew members reported smoother operations, faster response times, and confidence in the ship's reliability. Officers recognized that the vessel had not only been restored, but improved beyond its original design. Elias had achieved what many had considered impossible, creating a ship that could serve for decades to come with reliability, safety, and effectiveness. The story of the giant's transformation spread quickly. Other naval engineers, mechanics, and crews came to observe the ship and learn from Elias' methods. He shared his knowledge openly, showing the importance of careful inspection, attention to detail, and understanding the unique characteristics of each vessel. The ship became a model of restoration and innovation, demonstrating that even the most neglected machines could be revived and enhanced with skill and dedication. As night fell, Elias stood on the deck once more. The stars reflected on the calm water, and the ship rested quietly, engines humming softly. The journey had been long and challenging, but the result was extraordinary. The giant was now a fully capable modern vessel, a symbol of human ingenuity, perseverance, and care. The crew had learned, the officers had been impressed, and the ship itself seemed to shine with confidence and strength. Elias smiled quietly, knowing that the mission was only the beginning. The giant was ready to face any challenge, defend its waters, and serve as a model of excellence. He had given it life, power, and purpose, and in return it had become a partner, a living testament to the skill, patience, and determination required to restore greatness. The ship would sail for many years, a reminder that even the most neglected and struggling machines could be reborn into something extraordinary with care, knowledge, and persistence. The crew gathered one last time on deck, looking out at the horizon. They felt pride, confidence, and a deep bond with the vessel that had been transformed through effort, skill, and determination. The giant no longer begged for help. It commanded respect, trust, and admiration. Elias walked among them silently, satisfied that the ship had found its strength. The crew had found their confidence, and the mission had proven that nothing was impossible with patience and expertise. As the stars reflected on the water, the giant rested, ready for the next voyage, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to demonstrate the power of human skill and ingenuity. The ship's story had been written by its trials, its repair, and its transformation, and it would continue to sail as a living symbol of dedication, care, and the extraordinary potential hidden within even the most struggling vessels.